let's get into the BS framework, Woodward. What is this thing? Is it what it sounds like, or what are we talking about?
Well, I wish it was what it sounds like.
Something, is it?
No. Have you ever, let me back it up a bit. And I was thinking about this yesterday. People can relate to this. Have you ever asked somebody what they do, in a casual conversation where, you're just making conversation, and they get into this like monologue? It has too much detail. They're just talking too much about it. They started over explaining it, and it starts to sound more like a corporate sort of pitch than anything. I think that's probably happened to most people. The same exact thing happens when you have a lot to get through on a cold call. And there's a point where the prospect starts to think about something else. Just like if you ask somebody what they do and they start over explaining it, there's a point where your mind goes, just tell me what you do in one word and we just have another conversation. That's not really, I don't really care. When that happens, the call is over. So it's the same thing. So when the moment the prospect starts to think about something else on a cold call, because you're talking too much and it's starting to look like a familiar pattern, what happens is the moment that they start thinking about something else, they prepare themselves to deflect. And, as a sales rep, sometimes you kind of have to get through a little bit, and sometimes it's a little technical, depending on who your persona is. And what we're going to show you is a way to be able to not take anything out of that script, but make it more digestible for the prospect using the word but and the word so strategically. And what those words actually do, and I'm going to show you, what those words actually do is pull the prospect back into the conversation the moment they start to drift away from it. Pulls them back in, pulls them back in. And what it does is it makes what you're saying sound more digestible and sound like it's less than it actually is.
Yeah, and the reason why I really enjoy this is because, especially with a cold call, it's difficult for you to get through in the first place lots of times. And this other piece is actually having them hear what you have to say before, getting the proverbial stiff arm, right? Like I like to say you get. And so there's lots of tactics that you can use to break up the conversation earlier on, in your intro. You're starting to establish this two-way dialogue. But I've struggled a lot with, all right, well, once I get into that real permission, the magic words we're looking for of like, okay, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
Historically, I've struggled with making that short and concise. And maybe that's just because I'm not a wordsmith. And I think a lot of reps struggle with this. It's okay, now I've got my potential shot. They've asked me what I do. How do I actually get through enough information where, one, they're hearing me, but two, they actually understand the why, so that I can get that in front of them and get out without prolonging this too long. And again, getting shut down because I've overfried the eggs. And so this framework, when you showed it to me a couple weeks ago, I was really excited about trying it out, and it seems to really work. And so I'm excited to take a step back and have you introduce this to this group, because there's some psychology built into it. And I'm not sure if the screen share is going to work for you, Woodward, but if you want to pull up what this is and maybe the examples around how this works with and without it. And this will help set the stage for today's conversation.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to show it to you like this. This is without it. Okay. This is a cold call. We're going to use the one we used before, Ryan. This is phone ready leads.
Perfect.
I want everybody that's listening to this clear their head real quick and literally picture yourself as the prospect picking up the phone. So you're caught off guard, and I'm going to read the script. Ryan's going to be the prospect. And I want you to pay real close attention to where in this script you start to think about something else. Okay. Where you start to pull away from it a little bit. Okay. Ryan, answer the phone.
Hey, this is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. My name's Greg Woodward. You're not expecting my call. In fact, I think it's actually the first time we've spoken. Do you mind if I take a half a minute to share why I called, and you can tell me if it's relevant?
Go ahead. What's up?
Okay. For context, Ryan, I see that Nuco has sales reps, and the reason I'm calling, I wanted to share some information about a service we're providing for industrial companies that reduces the number of calls it takes to get a prospect on the phone For example, in your space right now, it takes reps an average of 35 calls to speak with someone. And what we do cuts that down to about 4 calls. If I can ask, are your reps using the phone to prospect for new business? Okay. Where did you lose me?
Right around send some information, share some information. By the time you said that, I was starting to wander a little bit. So, I got piqued a little bit more when you mentioned providing it for a vertical of companies, but now all of a sudden it's like, okay, when's this guy gonna get to it? It started to prolong a little bit for me.
Okay. So you get some sirens in the background here. So you lost me in sort of the beginning of my monologue.
Yep.
Okay. That's when you started to pull away from it. Okay. I'm going to do it again. And all I'm going to do is add the words but and so. This is the BS. I'm going to add the BS. And I want you to clear your head if you're listening to this and pay attention to how these words pull you back into the conversation and how it makes what I'm saying, which is the same exact words. I'm actually using more words in this example, how it makes it feel more digestible. Ryan, answer the phone.
Hey, this is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. My name's Greg Woodward. You're not expecting my call. In fact, I think it's actually the first time we've spoken. Do you mind if I take a half a minute to share why I called and you can let me know if it's relevant?
Yeah, you got 30 seconds. What's up?
Okay. For context, Ryan, I see that Nuco has sales reps, but the reason for my call, I wanted to share some information about a service that we're providing for industrial companies that reduces the number of calls it takes to get a prospect on the phone. So, for example, in your space right now, it takes reps an average of 35 calls to speak with someone. And what we do cuts that down to about 4 calls. But if I can ask, are your reps using the phone to prospect for new business? Feel a little different, doesn't it?
It really does, and I don't know. I'm curious to hear the audience here. Feel free to chat it in here, but especially that first "but" for me, because that's
Mm-hmm.
where I was getting lost in the first place. All of a sudden, it piques my interest.
Yeah. It right when you start to drift back, that pulls you back in. It's sort of like you're just pulling them right back in, and it cuts it up. So the reps that use this, one of your reps is using this, and they're just like, I can't believe how incredibly effective this is. So try it out. It is. You can take any script that you're using and just insert these, the buts and the so's followed by a very short pause before you continue. It just cuts it up, makes it digestible. The other thing I want to call out that's unrelated to the buts and so's. Okay, the goal of this script here is to get the conversation started in a way where the prospect has proper context about what you want to talk about. Okay, like they have relevant clarity, and you're able to get them talking with an open-ended question. But this question down here, the first question that I ask after I give them the proper context, they know exactly what this is about. I don't care what the answer to this question is. I don't care. Ryan, go ahead and say no to me for that.
No, cold calling's dead.
Okay. So your reps aren't using the phone to prospect at all?
No, not at all.
Do you want them to be?
I mean, no one picks up.
They don't? So now I'm having a conversation. So if you say yes to that or no to that, like the conversation is still going to continue, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mirror back what you said to me. And then I'm going to keep asking you more open-ended questions, because the reality of it is, if the prospect actually said to me, no, I don't want them to, then they're not a prospect anyway. They're just not. Right. Because if they don't want their reps to be cold calling, then we don't have anything to talk about. So it saves everybody a lot of time, because I didn't invest a lot of time into this. But most of the time, most of the time, the answer to that question is going to be yes, that they want them to. I don't care what the answer is if they are doing it is. So this first question that you ask has to be a question where you don't care what the answer is. Because when they give you an answer, you listen to it, you mirror it back, and then you ask them another question. The next question you ask to the prospect feels specific and tailored to them based on what they just told you. Now you're having a conversation. So you want to continue asking these open-ended questions that are also qualification questions. And then you want to move the conversation to giving them some examples, call value and story form, and then work them to the call to action, naturally. Make it sort of a natural segue. And that's really what the motion is. You're dancing around in here, qualification questions, value and story form, and you're moving the prospect down to call to action, which is now at this point, I move here when it feels like a natural conclusion for both of us. That's the motion itself.
There's a question that's streamed in here. that I think is interesting because it's true in a lot of conversations when you might be apologizing to somebody or trying to make a statement in a dispute or an argument. Patrick had said he's been told that using "but" means everything you said before that is false, and that's how I've taken that historically. Again, and if it's like in an argument or an apology, hey,
Yeah.
so on and so forth, da, da, da. But let me make my point again. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on the
That's right
power
on. I
of that word?
mean,
Right?
the word is so powerful because it negates everything that came before it, and allows you to focus the conversation on what comes after it. So that I agree with that. But where it's actually really strategic on a cold call is, yes, it will negate what comes before it. But if what came before it is a diffusing statement, right? A statement that either acknowledges resistance that the prospects put up, like, we don't have the bandwidth for that right now. If I said, look, right now it sounds like you don't have the bandwidth, I understand that, but I still get the benefit of diffusing the prospect, even though I've negated the words that I said. So when you use that word after a diffusing statement, and then you continue the conversation by asking an open-ended question, it's extremely effective on a cold call. And the reason why that is because you're dealing with an emotional decision process. Most of the objections and the resistance that you get, most of the objections you get are going to come in the form of resistance, but most of it is emotional because the prospect doesn't know enough about you, your product, your solution, or what you're even talking about to have a logical objection most of the time. So you don't want to try and solve that. So you can use a diffusing statement, the word "but," and then you can ask an open-ended question. The goal is to get the prospect talking. The more they talk, the more insight you get as to things you can grab onto to make this more and more relevant to them and to tailor the conversation to them. And the truth is, all of this sounds kind of complicated if you're hearing it for the first time, but it's not. You just take a piece of paper and you write down 3 qualification questions on one side of the paper, and you write down 1 or 2 examples of value and story form on the other. And you use those qualification questions, which are open-ended, more than a yes or no answer, that, they require more than a yes or no answer, to get the prospect talking. And then the moment that it feels appropriate, you say, look, that's interesting. The reason I asked you that, we do work with another client in your space, and what they were able to do, boom. And then you immediately ask another question to get them talking more. And you say, look, go back to the resistance. Look, I understand that you told me up front that you don't really have a lot of bandwidth right now. I get that. But because of, grab onto something they said, I don't think it would be a waste of your time if we could set up a time to chat. At least it'll provide you with enough insight as to what you can be doing this quarter, and also will inform down the road if it makes sense for us to have a longer conversation. Would you be open to doing that? That's how you do it. I mean, the reality of it is I didn't try and solve whatever the resistance was. I just acknowledged it, and I got the prospect talking. That's it.
It's not so much everything before it was false. It's a natural shift from a break in the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? So it can be used for diffusing. It can be for, everything I said up until that point was just, for you to hear me. Now I really want to make my statement. And I think that's, it's within context. That's why it's so powerful. And, strategically placing that with your other concept of this relevant clarity. I said that right again. I always get that wrong.
You got it right that time.
You're trying to, again, it's an interruption, especially if it's a cold call. I don't know who the heck you are. I'm trying to break through. Okay, this is a person. It's a human. They want to talk about this. And now I'm actually listening to the stages of the conversation necessary so that you can get into that open discussion. And I think the key here too is that open-ended or series of open-ended questions that don't put you into a hole.
Yeah.
A lot of times reps will come up with questions that basically, get them stuck. Like, oh, I guess we can't go anywhere. So the point you made at the end is that one question that you're going to ask, and I'm always armed with that too. If I can just ask one question, that's once you can have that nailed, where you don't care about the answer of that one question, but it sets the next set of the context for the discussion. That's super powerful. And you just walk through an exercise where you might be able to identify how to really set this up for success. So you're going to have 3 open-ended questions on one side, and then 2 value stories on the other side, and you're trying to bring those 2 together. Spend
the time.
A journey.
Spend the time planning out your questions and stick to the questions that you planned out. If you don't do that, and you don't really put the thought into that, you're going to, in the moment, you might wind up asking a dumb question that boxes you out. You might ask a question which the answer to it just shuts the conversation down.
Yeah.
I hear this all the time when I listen to call recordings. And, all you have to do to fix that is just to spend however long it takes to write down a list of really, really quality open-ended questions that are also qualification questions, meaning you need to know the answers to these anyway to advance the sales process. All that does is get the prospect talking in a way that's incredibly relevant to you. And that's exactly what you want to do here.